Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Thursday, November 13th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, we've got differing opinions on the reauthorization of the Small Business Innovation Research Program. First, we'll hear from Eric Blatt and the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government with their proposals. Then we'll get a different approach from Jerry Glover, Executive Director of the Small Business Technology Council. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. For years, the CyberCorps Scholarship for Service program has provided agencies with a steady pipeline of cyber talent. But now the program is at a crossroads. As CyberCorps students struggle to find work amid the ongoing federal hiring freeze, many are now facing the prospect of having to pay back their scholarship. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me with more info on this situation. Justin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
So fill us in on CyberCorps as a whole and the challenges some of the students have faced this year.
Yeah, the CyberCorps program has been around since 2000. It's funded by the National Science Foundation and administered through the Office of Personnel Management. What it does is provides scholarships for up to 3 years of support for an undergraduate or graduate student. And in return, the CyberCorps students agree to serve in government for a period of time equal to their scholarship. So it's really kind of served as a way to pull these cybersecurity students into government right off the bat rather than, having them go to industry, which is kind of the typical pipeline for new cyber grads. And so this program has, it graduates, several hundred every year. It's not huge, but it certainly makes a difference for federal agencies who could use all the cyber talent that they could get. This year, however, the hiring freeze instituted by the Trump administration and some of the government downsizing efforts has really created this kind of bleak hiring landscape for CyberCorps students who graduated perhaps in 2024 or are going to graduate this year or have already graduated this year. Even students who are graduating next year are concerned because obviously there are only so many federal jobs and hiring takes quite a while. So several students and alumni had job offers revoked, internship offers revoked when the hiring freeze went into effect. In some cases, they just didn't hear anything more about a tentative job offer that was on the table. And now they're having to compete for a very, very limited bucket of jobs in the federal government. As we know, the hiring freeze really limits what kind of positions federal agencies can hire for. This has led to the prospect of these students having to pay back their loans, their scholarships rather. They're required to find a federal job within 18 months of graduating. So not a ton of time, and especially now that the hiring freeze is about 10 months in and it's just been extended indefinitely. This is getting concerning for these students.
What are their options at this point? How are they responding to this dearth of opportunity?
Well, several hundred of them, I should say, have kind of gathered together in a group to share more information with each other, and most recently reach out to journalists like myself to kind of raise awareness about all this. They are, of course, sharing different tips on, roles that might pop up or, internships that might be available. But mostly they're trying to get in touch with folks in government. The Office of Personnel Management, as I mentioned, administers the program to try to push for some level of flexibility and to try to push for some perhaps deferment on some of that 18-month deadline that I mentioned. And so they've been organized now for several months, really since the hiring freeze started. And these stories, including mine, just came out about the CyberCorps program. So they're trying to really just raise awareness about the situation.
Has OPM responded in any way, either to the news stories or to the students themselves?
Well, up until recently, the students told me that OPM has not had a lot of communication about the challenges that they're facing. They essentially told the students to keep trying to, in one email, get creative with their job search. They've, in sort of a somewhat vague way, loosened some of the restrictions around having to necessarily find a federal job. Perhaps they've encouraged students to apply for state and local government jobs. But the students said that they really haven't addressed the elephant in the room, which is this hiring freeze, which is just creating a complete dearth of opportunities for students who are required to find work within the federal government for the most part. When the stories came out, OPM has now put out a statement saying that they are committed to the success of the scholarship service program. They are going to ensure Cyber Corps participants are supported during this time. And when the shutdown ends, OPM plans to issue guidance to agencies encouraging them to fully leverage the program to bring these professionals into public service. OPM also said that they're going to work with the National Science Foundation on a mass deferment of some sort to give graduates more time to secure qualifying positions.
The federal government has developed a cyber workforce, cyber talent strategy. I would assume that this program was part of that. Anybody commenting on how that strategy is moving forward as well?
Well, up until the Trump administration, it certainly had been a part of the strategy. And even now, you hear folks like National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross say, hey, we need more talented cyber and technology professionals in government, and we need to find ways to do that. And Cyber Corps has certainly been a piece of that national kind of cyber talent strategy, or the cyber talent strategy to bring folks into government. The challenge is that this whole push to bring more cyber talent into government is up against the much bigger issue of the hiring freeze and some of the changes that the Trump administration has made to the federal workforce, cutting positions rather than growing most agencies. And so those two things are a little bit at odds. No one within the Trump administration has directly addressed that, but the scholars certainly see the kind of irony in that folks are saying we need more cyber talent when you have this longstanding pipeline of talent that is now effectively being cut off until hiring really opens up again.
You talked to a number of these students. What kind of stories did they share with you about the impact of this disconnect?
Well, it's been discouraging, to say the least, for a lot of them. Many of them come from different backgrounds. Several were former military service members. Others had pivoted from a medical degree into a computer science degree. Others were just students who were going through and learned about the Cyber Corps program and decided, hey, I'd like to serve my country. And that was one of the overarching commonalities between all of them, is they all mentioned that they had a desire to serve, to give back to their local communities, to their country, to secure critical infrastructure and work for the federal government. Obviously, they have to in return for these scholarships, but there seems to be, it's not just sort of a quid pro quo. They seem to have this higher sort of calling here that they felt by participating in this program.
And so what resolution are they hoping for at this point?
Well, they said that the commitment to have a mass deferment is a good first step, but many of them said that this doesn't address the larger problem of the federal government is simply not hiring people into many of the positions that they previously were, especially cybersecurity and IT type positions. And for the jobs that are open, many of them require much more experience than a recent grad would have, or at a higher general schedule level than a recent Cyber Corps grad would have. And so that doesn't address the big picture issue. The mass deferment doesn't. So what they're hoping for is it's an evolving conversation, but some level of flexibility with how they can complete their service requirement, whether it's just because the federal government is on a hiring freeze indefinitely, whether that's just ultimately canceled. That might not happen, but if it doesn't, perhaps they could work for a federal contractor instead of having to work directly in a federal position, or they could have more people go and work for state, local, critical infrastructure rather than having to secure a federal position as they have to do in most cases. So they're hoping to have a conversation with OPM and the National Science Foundation about some flexibility in meeting their service requirement in the long run.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for bringing us this story. Much to watch here.
Yeah, thank you, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, it's time to reauthorize the Small Business Innovation Research Program. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The SBIR program channels federal R&D funding to small businesses with high-risk, high-reward technologies, fueling innovation in areas like defense, health, and energy. Some groups want to pair that reauthorization with reforms to improve oversight and commercialization. Here with one set of proposals is Eric Blatt, Executive Director of the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government and a partner at Scale LLP. Mr. Blatt, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Sherry. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It's about time to review and reauthorize the Small Business Innovation Research Program. Why do you want to make sure that happens?
Well, the SBIR program, or I often say the SBIR program, because I work with companies that contract with the Department of Defense. The SBIR program is a tremendously important tool for a number of things, including funding nascent high-risk technology, but also transitioning that technology to the federal government and particularly to our national security system. So the SBIR program annually awards about $4 billion a year to startups and small businesses. About half of that is awarded by the Department of Defense, and the DoD uses this program for a number of things, including to identify startups, commercial technology startups, that would not ordinarily think to work with the federal government, but they have technology that has a national security application. And this program provides sort of a great front door entry point for companies to come in, get a contract, start working with the federal government, prove out that technology can advance our national security, and then contribute to the mission.
But you represent a company that's part of a coalition that doesn't just want to reauthorize SBIR. You want to make some changes to it. And as I understand it, one of the arguments is that a significant portion of SBIR funding goes to companies that never commercialize their products.
Yeah, so I represent the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government. This is a trade association. We have about 75 members. Our members are commercial technology startups that want to come in and work with the government. And they don't want to come in as sort of dedicated defense contractors. They have products that have real national security applications, and they want to sell their products as products and contribute to national security, but also not completely upend the way they do business. They want to sell their product as product. So we do believe that the SBIR program is a fantastic program. Particularly in recent years where we've started getting open topics, reducing barriers to entry, making it easier for those types of high-performing technology startups to come in and work with the federal government. So we certainly don't want to see a lapse of the program. However, the program is not perfect. There are real problems in the program. It's still too hard for new companies to get into the ecosystem. There are barriers to entry. And the other really important category is there are barriers to exit. So it's very difficult for companies to transition their technology and move from these sort of smaller research and development contracts to real procurement contracts where the technology is actually being delivered and actually being used in the real world to make an impact, advance our national security, and be commercialized. So our top goals are to, yes, reauthorize, but also make sure that we are addressing those barriers to entry and those barriers to transition. And yes, it's true that there are companies in the ecosystem that have for years sort of encountered that resistance, that barrier to transition. And some of the companies have wound up sort of pivoting their business model. So instead of trying to do research and development, turn it into product and transition it and build a product around that transition product, instead what they've said is that's too hard. I want to just do phase 1 and then phase 2 and then go back to phase 1. And I'm going to do thousands of these research projects. And if the government comes to me and sort of pulls one forward, I'm willing to let them pay me to transition it, but I'm not going to put my own private capital and my own effort into building those transition pathways myself. So we do have some companies in the ecosystem that really haven't invested in transition and commercialization the way they really should have, and we think that's a problem.
Well, one of the recommendations that you all make is calling for a formal phase 3 program. As you just sort of mentioned, people get stuck in the phase 1, phase 2. But you would suggest that there's a particular funding cycle, the phase 3 cycle, that would help companies get over that valley of death. Explain how that would work.
Yeah, so the SBIR program has been around for about 40 years, and there's phase 1 and then there's phase 2. there's something called a phase 3, but there really is no phase 3 program. So you have companies coming in and then they complete their prototyping, the technology works, it solves a government need, but there's no process on the other end, and companies wind up getting stuck. And so we have advocated for a formalized phase 3 program. And the way that was implemented in the bill text in Senator Ert's Innovate Act is something called the Strategic Breakthrough Program. What the Strategic Breakthrough Program does is it allows a company to essentially match. So you go to your customer in whatever component you're working with, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, Special Operations Command, whoever it is. You go to your customer and you say, I have technology that I have developed under the SBIR program. Here it is. Here's why it advances your mission. But I know that you have all sorts of pressures on your budget, right? But if you can contribute a certain amount of money, say, if you can buy $5 million in my product, through the Strategic Breakthrough Program, I'm going to be able to match that with SBIR funds, the Strategic Breakthrough Funds, and potentially also with private capital sources. So you can say, if you can find $5 million in your budget to purchase this from me, I can actually deliver $20 million of value to you because it's going to be matched by other funding sources. So that can become a potentially very powerful tool for companies to get across that line and start actually selling their product to that customer that they can support.
I'm speaking with Eric Blatt. He's the Executive Director for the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government and a partner at Scale LLP. So in addition to that Phase 3 funding proposal that you have, you also emphasize the open topics opportunity. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you think it would benefit the program if it was more widely used.
Sure. So the open topics, this is an innovation that is coming up on maybe 7-8 years. But essentially the way the SBIR program had historically worked before the open topics is you would have various folks across the government and say, hey, I have this particular problem that I'm hitting. The bolts on my Joint Strike Fighter are falling out, and I need some way to get them to stick in a little bit better. Or the components on my mine are not working properly, and I want to improve how those are working. And there's a certain type of companies that responds to that, right? If you are a research and development service contractor that is dedicated to working with the Department of Defense, you'll comb through all of these, narrow niche topics, and you'll find the ones that interest you. You'll put in a proposal, and you'll win some percentage of them. But compare that to a commercial technology startup that might be working on, high impact technology in AI, cybersecurity, chips, space technologies, quantum, all of these different areas, right? If you are one of these companies, you are required by your investors to focus very, very intently on your specific technology domain so that you can create the best technology in the world in that particular field, right? Because you have to be able to compete on a global scale. So you have to focus very intently. So if you're that type of company, you're not going to comb through thousands of topics, the vast majority of which are irrelevant to what you're doing. What the open topic does is it says, if you have technology that has a credible mission application, you can come in on our solicitation and just tell us what the technology is, tell us why it meets a mission application, and if you're persuasive in doing that, you can have a contract and you can start working with us. So that's what the open topic does. It winds up bringing all these companies in that otherwise wouldn't contract with the Department of Defense at all and wouldn't participate in the program at all. The issue that we've had is that some of the agencies have actually in 2022, a requirement, all the agencies were told you have to have at least one open topic. You don't have to use all of your funding for open topics, but you have to have at least one. Some of the components since that time have really embraced that. Others have sort of eschewed and circumvented that requirement by taking the sort of same niche legacy topic that they would have otherwise used and just appended the word open in front of it. I can give you examples if you'd like. Essentially what that does is it eliminates the open topic and sort of avoids that requirement, and so companies don't come in. So the Innovate Act would propose to fix that by providing a clear definition for open topic, which I think should be uncontroversial.
That's really helpful. What are you hearing about Congress's perspectives on reauthorizing it?
So I think everyone I've spoken to on the Hill has been clear that they want the program to be reauthorized. The gap is whether we should do a reauthorization with some of the reforms to sort of reduce barriers to entry, improve transition, or whether we should just preserve the status quo. We got a little bit of a late start this year, and there has been sort of a central disagreement about sort of that multiple award winner issue or CIBR issue, in terms of sort of should we be requiring them to commercialize more aggressively. So that's been the primary blocker. Based on my conversations with folks on the Hill, I think we're starting to see some progress there. It really took sort of the pressure of that deadline, I think, to sort of bring the sides together. I think people are working earnestly to find a resolution that will keep everyone happy.
I've been speaking with Eric Blatt. He's the Executive Director for the Alliance for Commercial Technology in Government and a partner at Scale LLP. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Sherry. It was a pleasure to be here today.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the Army is updating its missile defense strategy and shifting command focus to better prepare the homeland. But first, what happens when the small business pipeline for life-saving drugs goes dark? You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Small businesses funded through the SBIR program have developed drugs generating $36 billion in annual sales, treating everything from Hodgkin's lymphoma to breast cancer. Now, nearly 2 months into the program's lapse, those cash-strapped innovators face mounting uncertainty as solicitations freeze and funding disappears. Federal News Network's Jared Serbu spoke with Jerry Glover of the Small Business Technology Council about how 12% of all new drug approvals in the past 2 decades came from SBIR-funded companies, why Phase 3 contracts worth billions are still moving forward, and what Congress should do to prevent future disruptions to this critical pipeline for pharmaceutical breakthroughs.
And Jerry, let's start with some big picture issues here. Bring us up to speed on, now that we're pretty well a month into the lapse at this point, what we know about where things stand with the overall program and what kind of work can and cannot proceed at this point.
Well, all Phase 1 and Phase 2 contracting process and solicitations has covered by the lapse. If you have an existing contract, you're allowed to continue working on those contracts. And Phase 3 follow-on contracts, which have gotten bigger and bigger over the years, are now several $1 billion a year. These are contracts that follow on to government work but do not include SBIR or STTR funding. Those are allowed to continue. That's a recent change. Any previous lapse, they've always said it wouldn't continue. But Phase 3s, and we're talking about huge amounts of money now. More money goes out in Phase 3 contracts than is actually spent on the SBIR program. So that being allowed to continue.
And was that a surprise? I mean, did people see that coming when the program first lapsed? The fact that the fact that Phase 3s were going to allow to be able to continue.
No, we were concerned because previous times they had said no, and General Counsel Office in DOD put out a guidance memo and that said that they were going to be allowed to, and making it also clear that existing contracts could continue as well. So that was both at the same time came out.
As we get into the discussion here, I want to talk about some recent work you all have done on drugs specifically, but just sticking with the broader big picture of the program, what have you all been hearing from members about what this lapse has meant to them in the real world?
Well, it's a serious problem. As you probably know, cash flow is a horrible problem for all small businesses, but especially in the technology world, where you're hoping to and expect and thinking you'll be got a great program and you've borrowed enough money from family and friends and others to get through a few months. Well, several months delay, it not only does it take that time, but it takes the time to gear back up and get things back underway. So, for example, a solicitation that had a closing date during this period of time, it takes a while for the government to go back on, republish when the solicitations can be received. Creates not only time but confusion, delay, and uncertainty. All right, so it's really bad for small businesses because cash flow is critical, and often these companies have put everything they have, mortgaged their houses, borrowed money from their family and friends, and expect an award, and then suddenly find out that the award doesn't come through. But they also run into the situation of it's not just the period of time, it's how long it takes to start the process back up. And so the uncertainty is just horrible for companies, especially new companies.
I know it's hard to set aside those cash flow issues in particular, but whenever we come out of this, how much of this lost time is recoverable? Can program offices within the government work through whatever backlogs are building up right now and kind of get things up to the point where this lapse would be sort of otherwise unnoticeable, or are we losing sort of unrecoverable activities here?
It's hard to say because we don't know how long the lapse is going to be. The longer the lapse, the harder it is to recover, the more time it takes, and the more is lost.
Fair enough. Jerry, I want to get into some very specific research that you all have done that you and I were just talking about off the air around pharmaceuticals. Not an area that, frankly, I'd think of as the first thing being associated with SBIR, but you found some major impacts there. Tell us what you found.
In 2022, the National Academy of Sciences issued a study looking at the SBIR program. What they found was that of all new drugs approved in the last 20 years, 12% came from the SBIR STTR program. What we did recently is we finally got the list of those drugs, looked into those drugs, and found that those drugs have annual sales of $36 billion a year. 9 of them had sales of over $1 billion. And now these drugs are pretty remarkable. And the reason that they treat diseases like Hodgkin's, multiple myeloma, Parkinson's, smallpox, multiple sclerosis, and HER2 breast cancer. When you lose time on developing these critical new drugs for public health, it's hard to make that back up. And some of these companies have great ideas, and it's amazing that this SBIR program, as great as it is and as accomplished as it is allowed to lapse and go silent.
Was it surprising to you to see how much small business involvement there is and has been in the pharmaceutical field and these innovations, period?
Yes, I was surprised because, quite frankly, you don't expect pharmaceuticals to come out of small business for this program to be so successful. We knew from the National Cancer Institute study a few years back that it was phenomenally successful in treating cancer and developing devices and technology for cancer. But to find out in drugs, which we ordinarily think of as a billion-dollar industry and millions of dollars to get a drug to approval, that small business and SBIR in particular played an important role in this program.
Let me wrap up with just kind of another big picture question. I know the hope right now is let's just get the program reauthorized and back up and running. But looking a little bit further down the road, what sorts of reforms and changes should Congress be considering as they look toward a long-term reauthorization?
Well, the first thing they ought to do is increase the size of the program, and they ought to make it permanent. These stop-starts every few years really does disrupt the program. And the idea that every year we can do it, and in this case, one senator alone can say, I don't want this to go, I'm going to let this program lapse. And that's hard to have a program that does this much good be in a situation where it's subject to the whims of one particular person.
Jerry Glover is Executive Director of the Small Business Technology Council, speaking there with Federal News Network's Jared Serbu. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, the Army is updating its missile defense strategy and shifting command focus to better protect the homeland. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Army is realigning its missile defense forces to prioritize homeland protection, placing 2 key commands under Space and Missile Defense Command. I spoke with Lieutenant General Sean Gainey, commander of Army Space and Missile Defense Command, at this year's AUSA conference to understand how this shift fits into a broader strategy that includes space operations, a new MOS, and lessons from today's global conflicts. General Gainey, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here.
How's AUSA going for you?
Fantastic. Getting the opportunity to tell the SMDC story, visit a lot with our industry partners, and connect with a lot of old friends. So great few days so far.
Speaking of the SMDC story, there's been some changes for SMDC lately. You've picked up some new organizations. Tell us about the transfer of the Army Air and Missile Defense Commands.
Yeah, a lot of great opportunities inside of Space and Missile Defense Command with the Army's transformation initiative. So as the Army transitioned to the Western Hemisphere Command, presented an opportunity for 32nd Army Air and Missile Defense Command that was previously under FORCECOM to move under Space and Missile Defense Command. And also it presented an opportunity for 263rd Army Air and Missile Defense Command that was previously under R North, doing the Homeland Defense mission set to move under SMDC. So now what you have is you have the Senior Army Air and Missile Defense Expertise headquarters, now the higher headquarters for two of our Homeland-based Air and Missile Defense Commands, one with a focus on the Homeland and the other with a global force mission focus, particularly on the CENTCOM AOR, but with the opportunity to focus on a Homeland. So therefore, put in the priority, the Secretary of War's priority on the Homeland with the alignment of these forces under Space and Missile Defense Command.
Is that a shift in focus and mission for those subordinate units now?
The 263rd always had the Homeland Defense focus. They currently defend the National Capital Region mission set. So they will continue to focus on the Homeland mission set. The 32nd Army Air and Missile Defense Command has had a focus in the CENTCOM AOR for the past several years based off of the mission sets in protecting our soldiers abroad. They've always maintained a global mission. They're service-retained forces. So this gives Space and Missile Defense Command the opportunity to leverage 32nd in multiple capacities globally. Also the Homeland. And
you also mentioned this is really sort of a realignment for Space and Missile Defense to a more Homeland-based defense mission.
Yeah, so it adds the warfighter component inside of our command. Our previous focus was, we've always had a focus on defending the Homeland with our ground-based missile defense system, our GBIs, primarily in Alaska area. And so now this addition of the two AAMDCs and the redesignation of Space and Missile Defense as a Army Service Component Command for GMD to now Army Service Component Command for all of AMD under the NORTHCOM commander right now.
And what's the timeline for this? Is it complete? Is it just underway in terms of transformation?
Yes, 1st of October was the effective date, so we've moved out. We've been coordinating with these subordinate elements for the past few months, and we reached a point of 1 October is where we want to determine initial operating capability, and we've done that, and we'll continue to progress onto full capability as we move forward in the future.
It's really an increase in span of control for you as the SMDC commander. Are you able to reinforce your staff to cover the additional responsibilities?
It's difficult because as we took on the additional elements, there are no additional resources provided, but we reorganize and we optimize inside of our command to meet this new mission set. And for Space and Missile Defense Command, this organization, with the inherent expertise of space and missile defense that we have in the organization, we were properly suited and properly aligned to accept these two AAMDCs. And, as the commander of SMDC, previously commanded a AAMDC, I have several senior leaders in my organization that have previously served in a Army Air and Missile Defense Command. My command sergeant major served as my command sergeant major in the Army Air and Missile Defense Command. So we understand the roles and responsibilities of a Army Air and Missile Defense Command. So it was a smooth transition taking higher headquarters of those two AAMDCs.
Tell us a little bit more about this shift to a primacy of focus on homeland defense. And the Army's always been fighting over there, right, to keep some distance between the enemy and the homeland. How is that changing how you're organized, how you're focused, what the plans are?
Yeah, so for Space and Missile Defense Command, we've always had that homeland defense focus. As I highlighted earlier, we defend the homeland with our GBIs from an intercontinental ballistic missile, and we're the only ones that do that. And so having that previous focus in understanding, with our role with NORTHCOM as Army Service Component Command for GMD at the time and now for AMD, working closely with 263rd, who's had the Homeland Defense mission inside of Space and Missile Defense Command. We assist in the role of that inside of the protecting the NCR with capability development. So we've always had a homeland focus, but we've also had a global mission. So our Army Space Forces have deployed globally in almost every COCOM, over the past several years. And so recently they've also started to do some of the homeland mission sets. So for us, it's a natural evolution, as the administration shifts and as the Department of War shifts their focus. For us, it's a easy shift. We see the homeland as priority number one, and we will accommodate and adjust accordingly to put more emphasis on something we've previously been doing.
So far, we've talked mostly about missile defense, but space is the first word in your command. How is the Army engaging in a space mission?
Yeah, so I'm often asked that question, and believe it or not, the Army is the largest consumer of space, and so to be able to protect our equities in space, to be able to enable our formations to fight in a future current and future conflict where precision fires, being able to move and communicate are heavily reliant on space capabilities. It only makes sense to have those capabilities inside of the Army to enhance what we're doing. And also as the Army moves into close fight, having space in the close fight and close support is critically important to enable our forces on the battlefield.
That it's essentially a joint mission. So how do you integrate with Space Command and U.S. Space Force?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. As the commander of SMDC, I'm also the Army Service Component Command to SpaceCom. So we have the opportunity to work closely with the SpaceCom staff and with the other components from a joint perspective and really work work through the equities of how do we provide that close space support and able to observe the Space Force as they do orbital warfare. So it's Space Command has the ability to, across all of the components and all the services, integrate, synchronize, and properly use services capabilities to enhance the overall space mission set.
And the Army's creating a mission occupational specialty for space. Tell us how that's going.
We are, the 40 Delta, and we're very excited about that. So right now, what the Army has been doing, you highlighted the Army having space. So we've been doing that on a borrowed manpower process. So we've been taking soldiers from the Air Defense Branch, Signal Corps Branch, Military Intelligence Branch, bringing them into our space formations, teaching them how to do space operations, and then put them in formations. And we have 3 years to do this before they go back to their basic branch. So it's a very difficult construct to be able to build trained and ready, sustained forces, and to be able to build a non-professional, non-commissioned officer corps. So what we've done is we've taken the 40 Delta, and so now what we'll do in October 26th, we're in the process of assessing soldiers into 40 Delta. So now we have space experts that will do the space occupational moving forward and creating a professional Army Space MOS to eventually create an Army Space Branch to move forward with. Because of the future fight and the current fight, the reliance on space is so significant. Having the trained MOS and a space branch inside of the Army, now is the right time to do that.
It's a real shift in focus and a real challenge to build out a new MOS, but it seems to align with the Army's air and missile defense strategy. So Tell us about what that new strategy is for 2040.
Yeah, we're excited. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in Space and Missile Defense Command.
You're not bored down there.
No, we're not, and we are excited because the Army leadership has really invested in this command. And so when you look at things that the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army are constantly talking about, continuous transformation in contact, that's happening inside of Space and Missile Defense Command now. And the strategy is an evolution of taking previous strategies and visions and looking to the future. So we are in probably the most significant missile fight that we've been in globally with what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel. We're seeing the number of threat platforms, whether it's ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, or unmanned systems, drones, that we've ever seen in any conflict. And so looking at the lessons learned and looking at the complexities of how the threat is now employing not in one salvo, but mixed salvos to create several complexities for the operator, we felt it was time to take the good work that's been done in the past and move it forward with the integration of these lessons learned, how we're going to fight in the future, and what's our path to fight in the future going to be with the future systems and capabilities to get after this complex threat. So we've completed the strategy. We're now working its way up to the Chief of Staff of the Army and Secretary of the Army for their final approval. We believe that will happen in the November timeframe, but we've been working very closely with the force, moving this forward, and we're excited to get that out to the larger force.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. Thanks for taking some time out here at AUSA to talk to us.
I appreciate you having us and let us continue to tell our story, so thank you.
Absolutely. Lieutenant General Sean Gainey commands the Army Space and Missile Defense Command. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. A spending deal to end the longest government shutdown also keeps some agencies funded through the end of the fiscal year. That includes the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is still going through an agency reorganization. Lawmakers have included language that ensures the VA doesn't shed too many employees. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more insight. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
So what specifically is in the spending package that addresses the VA's workforce changes?
Well, there's a lot of ink spilled here from lawmakers really guaranteeing and ensuring that the VA has the workforce it needs to carry out its mission. There's a provision in here calling on the department sharing staffing models with the House and Senate Appropriations Committees going forward within 90 days of the bill going into effect, directing them to show staffing models that show that the VA is prepared to facilitate its own goals. Some of those are legislative in nature. For the healthcare side of VA's operations, that means ensuring that veterans are waiting no longer than 20 days for primary and mental health care appointments and no more than 28 days for specialty care appointments. And on the VBA side of things, the Veterans Benefits Administration, that agency has to ensure that employees are adjudicating incoming benefits claims within 125 days. So those are the benchmarks that they're supposed to hit. And lawmakers want to make sure that they have the workforce in place to keep meeting those benchmarks.
The VA's workforce strategy has been all over the map this year. 83,000 cut, 30,000 cut, some RIFs, some reinstatements. Where are they at right now?
It really has been an evolving plan over this year. You mentioned that we started this year with the VA initially planning to cut 83,000 positions, and they were going to get to some of that through a department-wide reduction in force. After that, after some months after that plan, the VA decided that it was no longer going to pursue a department-wide reduction in force and that they were going to instead eliminate 30,000 positions by the end of fiscal 2025, largely through attrition, letting people walk out the door and just not filling those positions going forward. What we've seen most recently is that the VA is looking at some sort of cap on its existing workforce. That's going to be the baseline from which it's going to be operating, and that any deviation from that baseline, any moving up of that baseline beyond what they're currently at would require some sign-offs of leadership to ensure that the agency really does need to grow in that direction or have a top-line workforce that's higher than it is currently. It's worth pointing out that we haven't seen a final fully baked version of this reorg plan arrive. We've seen this through leaked memos, and that the shutdown in part has delayed the rollout of that fully formed reorg plan. And some expectation is that that plan is going to be emerging sometime before the end of this calendar year.
All of that variability sometimes felt a little ad hoc or haphazard, not really tied to mission performance. You mentioned that the new bill is going to have some mission performance targets. What does it have to say specifically about the veteran crisis line?
Also a part of VA that has been very much in the news. It was only this summer that the Senate VA committee had a hearing about the Veterans Crisis Line, and there some former VCL employees described to lawmakers how VCL employees are often inundated with incoming calls, but also text messages and web chats. Those are also formats where veterans can reach out to the hotline if they are in moments of crisis. And reflecting in this bill here, there's some real concern from lawmakers that the VCL maybe doesn't have the workforce or doesn't have the resources it needs to keep up with this very urgent mission of making sure veterans, sometimes in moments of suicidal ideation, don't have all the support that they need. And so there's language in here that requires the VA to have its current staffing levels in place. It bars the VA from reducing staffing levels, hours of operation, or services at the Veterans Crisis Line or any other of its suicide prevention programs. And they note in this provision here that the VA's crisis line is often the first place a veteran will turn to in a moment of crisis, really underscoring the importance of this program.
Well, we're talking here a lot about workforce. This will be the VA's annual appropriation. Are there any other provisions in the bill that caught your eye?
There's a lot here on the future of VA's electronic health record. It is a long-term, multi-billion-dollar project that has had a very rocky rollout since the start. And there is a path forward here. VA has announced plans to resume go lives at 13 locations in calendar year 2026, and this spending bill backs them up. It gives them $3.4 billion to go ahead with those projects and also ensure optimization of the sites that are already using the new EHR. And this is notable because this is forward momentum we haven't seen up until this point. The VA has been on pause with new go lives, and it has been up until April of 2023. That's when it announced its reset on the project to make sure that sites already using the EHR are performing well, and there were well-documented cases of employees at those sites having problems with the usability, they're not being as productive as they have been, and also some concerns about patient health, that sometimes the record was not performing everything that it was supposed to. So there is a plan going forward here. And one thing that's notable, because there has been so much concern about the future of this project, about 30% of the funding of the $3.4 billion is on hold for right now. Lawmakers are going to hold on to those funds until at least next summer, and they plan to release those funds once the VA has demonstrated a couple of things, among them 4 successful go-lives going forward, 4 consecutive successes where there haven't been any major issues with the rollout, and as long as VA continues to update lawmakers with updates on the overall scope of the lifecycle cost of the EHR and whether they are providing regular updates on how it's been going at new sites and old sites, they will eventually get those funds in totality.
That's an interesting oversight and accountability mechanism. We haven't really seen Congress put that in place before.
No, this is a new thing, and there really has been bipartisan concern about the future of the EHR. Of course, eventually this is going to go live at all 170 VA medical centers. So this is something that lawmakers do hear from constituents about, people who are nervous if this is coming to their local VA medical center, coming to their district. The lawmakers typically get a lot of calls and complaints and concern about this. So they want to make sure this is ironed out going forward.
We'll see how it plays out then.
We will, absolutely.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman, and you can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Terry.
The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.